Hello, everyone. Welcome back to TJ Shorts, our series of video interviews with recent Theater Journal authors. I'm here today with Shannon Woods, who is a PhD candidate in performance as public practice at the University of Texas, Austin, and whose article, The Threat Is Now, Choreography, Temporality, and the Active Shooter Drill, appeared in Theater Journal, Volume 76, Number 3, in September 2024. Hi, Shannon. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, thank you so much.
I'm really excited for this opportunity to share your work with the broader Theater Journal audience and maybe potential Theater Journal readers. So, to start off, I was wondering if you could just give us a brief summary of the topic of your article and its main argument.
Sure. Something I explore throughout the article is what I call performances of protection. So it's kind of like a catch-all phrase that's part of my larger dissertation research, but it looks at how we might use, like we kind of in like different contexts, use like embodied responses and pre-planned choreographic actions in response to like an anticipated threat. So one of the big kind of contexts that I'm looking at performances of protection in this article is active shooter drills, which is very familiar in US contexts, but it is for those maybe not in the US, it's a planned response, usually among teachers, students, and administrators, that in response to someone who might come into a school and cause violence with a gun and try to like harm others indiscriminately. So what has kind of happened as that's been like an ongoing issue through the last 20, 25 years now almost in the US is uh, a response that is highly, what I see as highly choreographic. So, in response to that kind of threat, we have in schools started to garner a response that has a set movement vocabulary and almost like a structured improvisation going on. So, right there are a lot of like theoretical and like dance studies terminology I'm using, but we're using kind of these concepts to prepare and kind of preempt any kind of danger that is happening. And that's kind of what makes up a performance of protection. Because a lot of the times there's a lot of nuances that you see in the article, but like a lot of these their performances of protection, because sometimes they act as band-aids to a larger scenario. And what these performances of protection allow often are larger symptoms that have to do a lot with carcerality, the school to prison pipeline, because uh, a lot of these safety measures invite and start to entrench policing and safety. And also because of that, there's an ongoing criminalization of students of color. So to kind of explore that, I lean into how time is the ultimate ultimate measure for success or failure in performances of protection in the active shooter drill. So I use a lot of different kind of performance study scholars who look into temporality to understand performance and um, understand performance and sorry, apologies, and time and how they kind of have this we can explore other temporal possibilities through performance. But also because like the police and the police state, which is another big umbrella term I use throughout this piece, it's just kind of like the different ways in which police show up and appear as like kind of those foundations for safety in different contexts in the US. But how the police state uses time as a way to like measure efficacy and measure efficiency and kind of is like this like asset to kind of gain control of. And when you gain control of time, you can gain control of bodies. So that is kind of like an overview of like what I look at in the piece. But I kind of explore that through field work that I've conducted with this research, attending different active shooter trainings and conferences, such as the National School Safety Conference, and just like kind of getting a sense of like what law enforcement is talking about when they are generating these choreographies and then how it's disseminated in schools.
This is all really fascinating. And I have a 5-year-old who's entering the school system this year. So, certainly thinking through something she will encounter at school. I think is resonates a lot with me as a parent as well as a scholar from all of the fascinating theoretical angles that you're bringing to this topic. I'm really interested though in how you got interested in looking at this particular set of case studies. So could you tell me a little bit more about how you came to this topic?
Yes. So it is kind of starting from present data backwards, but it is part of my dissertation research now. So which will be, which is almost done, about halfway there. So we're in a good progress. But so I'm heavy in it now, and I've been thinking a lot about policing and choreography, and how like choreography is like a huge asset for police, and which I cite also dance scholar Andre Lepecki, who talks about choreo policing, and the choreo political. And but I guess that it all kind of really started my inquiry into that. And my dissertation research was during my master's research. It's in at NYU while I was studying with Andre. But I was listening to a podcast from This American Life that was about uh, uh, it came out in 2018, so it was pretty recent to the Parkland, Florida shooting. But it was an interview with different educators at Parkland at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, and what kind of the training was and what the response was. And really, it was just very compelling. And it just kind of that honestly, just that one podcast listen has launched multiple years of like research and inquiry into what this is and what we're doing. Yeah, yeah. So it's just been, I haven't been able to shake it yet since that.
Yeah, it seems like the kind of topic that is both deeply disturbing and difficult to work on, but also so important to be looking at this moment in time. Since you're talking a little bit about the dissertation already, could you tell our listeners about how this connects to some of the other things you're looking at in the dissertation project, or more generally, your main interests in theater and performance studies research?
Yes, yeah. So this kind of inquiry into active shooter drills kind of hits in the middle of the dissertation. So I look at different policing mechanisms and approaches that kind of go to the from that begin in the mid 20th century with Cold War duck and cover. That's usually like a big point of comparison with active shooter drills, is looking back at that like time in which like it was massively rehearsed, and kind of what performances of not only protection but performances of patriotism that kind of came up, and how these drills like kind of encourage an allegiance to nationalism and citizenship because of some like kind of like common enemy abroad. So I kind of look at how patriotism is baked into some of these drills, beginning with the Cold War. Then I go into how officer like kind of the officer friendly figure, and kind of in that mid between the 2000s into the 21st century, and between the Cold War, there were just it would these programs entered schools as a way to make palatable and um, and make more friendly and convivial your relationships between officers and community members, especially how that helped a lot by focusing on children and the youth turn in policing. And how this shows up continually, how the police is now like a mainstay in US public schools. There's more heavily policed in Black and brown communities than white middle class communities, but how it's still like there is always a police officer kind of present to gonna be this like this figure of pastoral power. And then the next chapter is looking at how different communities, especially like Black communities in the US now, need to create kind of counter choreographies within communities and kin to protect themselves against the police. So that there are also, this isn't only just about how police are creating safety and choreography, that is kind of becomes our instinct to certain, state-based violences that are kind of recurring, but how in within communities there need to be safety mechanisms, based on your identity and also your class, gender, and ability. Um, and then finally, I'm just trying to like think about this in future research about how how there needs to be like kind of more of an abolitionist and feminist intervention into this. Like that's kind of like what comes next. Because a lot of the times it's like, okay, well, what do we do? Right? Like policing. But this is just one small sliver of like the larger conversation about policing, funding police and defunding police and abolition at large. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think thank you for that. That already gives a partial answer, I think, to my last question, which is about takeaways. But this idea of what comes next, I think, leads naturally out of this body of research. So, especially for any undergraduate students or non-specialists who might be listening to watching this video interview, what would you say are the key takeaways of your article? What do you want people to leave with in terms of their understanding, future action, how it connects to broader areas of concern in the US or beyond today?
I think, right, like, definitely what comes next is more like of an abolitionist intervention to these choreographies. But abolition, right, like that, it's an ongoing practice that happens, right? Like it's not something that just happens tomorrow. It's ongoing and it's in like a lot of different areas that, we have to address it in life. But I guess for one way to start, right, because that can be a very overwhelming task, but like one way for start to start, that my work is trying to encourage is see how we move and how it is often under the guidance of law enforcement and under like law enforcement's best interest and maybe why that is and then how often it shows up. Because like right, like performance studies, it sometimes it can be like very fascinating, but it can all be very convoluted and it can be like where is the boundaries between like how what we're analyzing. But I think like all in all, it really it's helpful to think about how how we can use like right like concepts from like especially like theater or in my case right like choreography and dance and choreography to understand social and cultural life. So like with choreography it's always the big thing now is like okay right it's not only about how we write down movement or transmit movement, it's like it's about power. So who's the maker, who's the mover, and what's happening between that negotiation between movement and remembering movement especially and trying to making it become instinctual. So I think like when you're like crossing the street, like when are you doing it, like or like when you pass an officer or like when you pass like like it's just there's what body instincts come up, and how do we might move a little bit differently when we're like by police, and that also it will vary based on identity. And I think it's just like finding those little things like they are packed with meaning. It's not just like a coincidence. So that's what I would encourage to look at.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like viewers and future readers of your article to know before we wrap up?
I just think, yeah, I just keep thinking about it, enjoy it, and like always, don't reach out if you have any questions or are interested in this more. I love talking about it.
Thank you so much. So to our viewers, this is Shannon Woods, PhD candidate in the Department of Theater and Dance at the University of Texas at Austin. Her article is entitled The Threat Is Now, Choreography, Temporality, and the Active Shooter Drill, and it can be found in Volume 76, Issue 3 of Theater Journal, September 2024. So thank you all for watching. Check out the article. Thank you, Shannon, for your time.
Thank you.